I'm Chris Feltweiss, and I'm going to be your speaker today. We're going to proceed as follows. We have a number of prepared talks or prepared statements from a number of people, after which we will open up the debate to the floor. If you have something to say, it is traditional in the House of Commons that you stand in front of your chair, or otherwise just get my attention. But no one can speak unless they've been recognized by the speaker. At the end of the session, and I will keep strong time on everyone's remarks, at the end of the session, I will put the question to a vote. We will put the question, as they say, and we will have a voice vote, yeas and nays. Either side at the end of that can demand a division, as they say, or a recorded vote, rather than leave it up to my assessment of who won. But without much further, we will begin our remarks today with our Prime Minister, Mr. Key, to move the motion to the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the motion before this body here assembled today is that the internet will lead to further depersonalization of society. Now, thanking everyone for being here and spending your time with us, because time is the most valuable resource we have, and is the only thing that they're not making more of. To discuss, of course, one of the most important things in modern society, the internet. Ever since Al Gore invented it and then George W. Bush multiplied it, it's definitely been a very crucial part of most people's lives. Specifically, though, the internet, while it can be used for many great things, like playing Angry Birds, it can also be used for many poor things, as we'll talk about here today. And that is the idea of depersonalization, the idea of a lack of identity or a removal of identity from members of society. And of course, the internet is worldwide, but we'll really today be looking at world society, but really focusing and parametricizing on American society. For this purpose, the government offers the following points. First, the type of anonymity that's available on the internet. The fact is, when we see people from the day to day, we all have different parts of our identity that we hide, that we show. Like a diamond, we show different assets, different facets of our personalities. For instance, today people come dressed quite nicely to speak before here because that is what is proper. But for all you know, underneath all these nice clothes, I could be covered in tattoos and go to rock concerts on weekends. The fact is, in society, we always depersonalize just a little bit, but the internet allows us to do even more than that. Because I still stand before you here today in New Orleans, Louisiana, but at the internet, I can be absolutely anywhere, and I can lie to you and say I'm whoever I want to be. And that leads to people acting out in a way they normally would not. Now, specifically, when we look at cultures built on anonymity, we can look to 4chan. 4chan is an internet website, a culture built around anonymity where no one knows what anybody else is or who anybody else is. And fundamentally, Mr. Speaker, what we see here is because they are anonymous, they are able to do things that they otherwise would not do in a normal circumstance. I give one example. There was a high school student in the state of Texas in the last 6 months who unfortunately took her own life. Someone went onto this website and requested the people, all the millions of people on 4chan, on this thing called B, it's a message board, an image board, where people go and post pictures and comments, and said, could you please go pay respects to this person's memorial Facebook page? However, because they were anonymous, what they did was instead of going to pay respect, they went to pay disrespect. They vandalized the page. They put all kinds of obscene things there, to the point where one of them very maliciously hacked the deceased Facebook account and sent a message to the person's grandmother saying, Grandma, I didn't kill myself. I'm actually alive. I don't know why people are saying this. These types of horrible, traumatic messages are something that we would never do to a person's face. But since I'm only looking at a computer screen and attacking a profile on another computer screen, it depersonalizes. And that's exactly the type of thing that the internet promotes. So when we look to this, we see that through anonymous, we see a culture with anonymity. And why it will increase is because anonymity is also not necessarily a bad thing. This depersonalization is often useful. We've repeatedly looked and seen that people, for instance, who have certain diseases, whether they be sexually transmitted diseases or cancer or something else, might not want to tell other people they have them. But they need to still seek support. People with eating disorders, for instance, may be able to anonymously go onto support groups on the internet. And we will see an increase in society because of these good things. But as we increase the availability of anonymity on the internet, we also increase depersonalization because the same exact tools that hide the person's identity who is in a rape victim's crisis center can also hide the identity of the person who maliciously vandalizes a Facebook page. Secondly, the government offers the point looking at recent movements. The Arab Spring movement, as well as Occupy Wall Street or Occupy pretty much anywhere, as well as also the Tea Party, were movements that were really leaderless. They were founded online by people grouping together, specifically the Occupy movement and Arab Spring. You can't really look and name a leader of the Occupy movement. And what happened was it allowed people to come together in a way that we'd never done before, but also a way that we didn't know who these people were or what they stood for. How many times did we see on the news, what does Occupy stand for? What did they want? Well, we didn't really know what they wanted because it wasn't really a group so much as a conglomeration of people drawn together because the internet allowed their depersonalization. No greater evidence can be shown of this depersonalization than the fact that Time magazine, their person of the year, is the protester. Not Martin Luther King, not Gandhi, not a person who got up and gave an impassioned speech, but the nameless, faceless, depersonalized protester is Time magazine's Man of the Year. At the point where we see this, we see these things can only happen because of the internet. Because as the internet connects all of these people together, we see that these movements are now seen as a group of people, a mob, for instance. Finally, we offer the concept of Bowling Alone. Bowling Alone is a very famous book in which it talks about the fact that we used to bowl in leagues. We used to get together and have group gameplay, but the technology lets us feel like we're connected to many people. Now you see people who have 800, 900, 1,000 friends on Facebook, but do they really know 1,000 people? Are they really close friends with 1,000 people? Of course not. But what we see is they replace what we had before. Looking just to the answer of pop culture, we looked at video games. What used to be, if you wanted to play a multiplayer video game, you would invite several people over to your house and all have 4 people playing on the same screen. Nowadays, multiplayer actually means you get on and you log on and there are 12 million other people on the World of Warcraft. And you don't know who these people are. And that's the whole point, is at the point where we see this, we log on individually from our own homes, empty apartments, empty places, and we replace real socialization with socializing with screen names of these other people. And yes, they're real people, but you don't know these people from Adam. And the whole concept here is that we see that people are able to use this and able to abuse this. At the point where we separate, then it creates certain harms. For instance, as you may have seen the popular television show Chris Hansen's To Catch a Predator. At the point where we see this, we see that people use the depersonalization that occurs because of the internet for wrongful and for lawful purposes. The criminal gets on there and says, I'm a 14-year-old boy, when in fact he's a 40-year-old man looking to molest a child. And the police officer also depersonalizes it and says, well, I'm a 12-year-old girl, but he's really a 35-year-old officer ready to arrest the guy. At the point where we see this is the effect of the internet. It becomes much easier to hide who we are. It also becomes much easier to be lost. So in review, the internet is a wonderful thing. As comedian Tom Pappas observed, it's brought the world a different place because a Jewish college dropout invented Facebook, which let the Arab Brotherhood help topple government in England, or in Egypt, I'm sorry. It's done all kinds of interesting things, all kinds of good for the world, and it's also done things allowing for depersonalization. So when we see this, when we see the anonymity allows people to do things that they would never ever do to people in real life, face to face, we see depersonalization. When we see that Time magazine can't even name one of the protesters to be Man of the Year, but the nameless, faceless, depersonalized is the Man of the Year, we see the depersonalization of the internet. And when we see that we are in fact bowling alone, that when we connect, we no longer invite people over, we simply connect to the World of Warcraft, we see depersonalization. For all these reasons, the government moves that the internet will continue to increase depersonalization within society.
Hear, hear. The chair recognizes the leader of the opposition.
Hear, hear.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by first extending a blanket of thanks, first and foremost, to my partner for her continuous support, for coming with me along this trip. Also, I'd like to thank my coaches for their continuous support and constantly helping us develop our lines of argumentation. Also, Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here. And also, finally, I'd like to thank Mr. Rich for sending the e-bike to this invitation. I don't think that without email, we'd be able to actually get here, and that's actually going to help prove our point in today's case. First of all, We think that this debate is about how people interact in our society. It's not simply about the identity that they have, but how that identity applies to society as a whole. We also believe that the internet is critical for bringing people together, overcoming social barriers, and interacting with others. We also think it's a primary means of communication. And then finally, we also think that the internet further personalizes society by increasing the number of opportunities that people have for communication and the overall quality of that communication that occurs online. We're going to prove this in several lines of argumentation, but first of all, I think that we need to do a little bit of rebuttal. Let's first start with their interpretation of depersonalization. The last speaker tries to say that depersonalization is the removal of an identity, and the examples he gives is anonymous. Now, anonymous online means that you don't have a face and you don't have a name. But Mr. Speaker, we think this is one of the key problems about how we identify others. We think that they go beyond simply their name and their face, that people have other facets of their personality and their persona that are fundamentally more important than simply the name and face. But furthermore, we also think that this concept of anonymous and the freedom of choice should not be simply removed because of a few number of instances in which people abuse the system. Abuses of systems and abusive systems occur all of the time, and we think that a small minority of abuses is not enough to prove the point that on balance, depersonalization occurs online. First of all, he says that anonymous is bad because people act how they normally wouldn't be, and they hide their personality. But first of all, we don't think that it's necessarily a harm because people choose to be anonymous. They also choose to enter in these discussion forums that they have. It's not like someone's forced to a computer and then forced to log online and then get cyberbullied. These are all choices when people decide to engage these social networks. But furthermore, we think that cyberbullying and bullying in general happens all the time, and we don't see why this is a harm that is unique to the internet and why that leads to depersonalization. But furthermore, we think that the sort of discussion forums that exist online are the key means of overcoming these sort of bullying. That's whenever you have individuals who perhaps is the victim of being bullied, then they create an advocacy group or perhaps a website that allows people to share these ideas to figure out a way of overcoming these problems and overcoming these social barriers. And then finally, he tries to suggest that the Arab Spring is bad because people didn't know what the name or the face was, but I think that him assuming that just because there wasn't a face attached to the revolution doesn't mean that the revolution was not important and that the revolution did not do something that was great for democracy and great for the rest of the world. We don't see why anonymity outweighs the positive benefit of allowing people to come together and to be able to coalesce a movement. And furthermore, we think that because of the fact, by simply virtue of getting together and having a physical movement, that physical presence is the interpersonal interaction that we're talking about whenever we discuss personalization. So we have to ask ourselves, what does a personalized society look like? We think that, first of all, the access to interpersonal interactions amongst individuals is a key facet to interpersonal relationships. We think that this happens both politically, professionally, and personally, and this is something that is generated furthermore online. We think that the internet was actually created as a primary means of communication, or as a means of allowing people who are geographically limited to be able to communicate with one another. And we think that communication is key to allow for personalization in today's society. First of all, we think that the internet increases our personalization by simply bringing people together. Now you might ask yourself, how exactly does this occur? Well, we think there are several examples that exist right now. First of all, we can look at the example of blogs, right? And allowing people to get together and to define their common interests, to discuss their common interests, and then have a sort of constructive discourse that exists within that forum. We also think that Skyping is a great example of whenever personalization is actually increased within society as a result of the internet. A good example of that is army families, and the fact that the solidarity between families when people are shipped overseas is maintained by the ability to get online, you have a Skype conversation, you have that face-to-face interpersonal interaction that not only sustains those relationships, but it actually strengthens those relationships. And this is the sort of increase that we're looking for. And then also we can look to simply social networking websites, the fact that people can have things like group invitations and event invitations. We think this is the sort of implicit reason as to why this necessarily leads to increased personalization. If more people are getting together, if more people are talking, and more people are sharing those ideas, we think that is comparatively more personalized in society than that of absent the internet. And then furthermore, we also think that there's simply a place for everyone online. This is also why it's a benefit. It allows people to actualize themselves, to be able to understand their identity, and to be able to share these concepts with other people. So whether or not your interest is trying to figure out the better way of germinating plants, or to talk to someone else about what kind of messed up thing Rick Perry might say next, we think that there is a place for you online, and this place should be found. Furthermore, we also think that because of the unique accessibility of the internet, that personalization will necessarily increase. We think that, first of all, there's simply an ease of access, and there are plenty of examples of this. First of all, we said that there's a low cost of the internet, if any cost at all. There's been a lot of discussion recently about whether or not the internet should become a public utility simply because they realize the heavy reliance that society has on the internet. But furthermore, we can look to things like Wi-Fi, and the fact that like McDonald's and Starbucks, they provide free Wi-Fi, the ability for people to access the internet, to communicate with one another, and to share their ideas. And then also, the fact that it's not geographically limited means that more people can get online, more people can personalize themselves, can establish their identity, and engage us with the rest of the world. There are examples of this such as e-conferencing or online interviews. The fact that people can now get jobs by having a face-to-face interview online. That way they can exhibit their persona and they can persuade that employer that they are worth hiring. We think the fact that this exists in society simply proves the point as a whole. But furthermore, we think that the overall implication of this is twofold. Is that first of all, the internet is going to, or forges new social relationships every second. Every second someone's getting online. Every second a conversation is happening, and these conversations are what personalize society and lead to ultimate solidarity. But furthermore, we also think that allows people to discursively build upon their ideas, to further strengthen their relationships, and these are things that happen with the internet. We believe that more communication will lead to the increased ability to personalize society. But to the second issue, we also think that the internet improves upon the quality of our personalized interactions, and this occurs in several ways. First of all, it allows people to uniquely personify their identity. I think it's interesting that in his definition, he says that depersonalization is the removal of identity when oftentimes people use the internet as a way of establishing their own identity. So rather than facing the social barriers that exist when perhaps, say, if I'm a Latino and someone doesn't like me, they can look at me and make that decision. Whereas if I can establish my own identity online, I can show myself as a person, show the things that I think are important, and personalize that society in that facet. But furthermore, we also think there's a unique individual contribution to this. The fact that you can put the information that you believe is relevant to yourself. The fact that you can establish your own identity. And furthermore, that you can just do things like fact-checking or editing your emails. These are the sort of engagements that allow individuals to have more personalized relationships in societies. And we think that these are strengthened by the use of the internet. So ultimately, whenever you're looking at today's debate, you're going to see that not only does depersonalization not occur, but we think that personalization increases, both for the quantitative reason of people being able to access the internet and the ease of access, but also for the qualitative reason of the fact that once they access this communication, once these relationships exist, they only get stronger, they only get better, and they get more personalized. And for these reasons, we are proud to oppose the motion.
Hear, hear. The chair recognizes now the majority whip to rebut.
No enthusiasm over there.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, as the previous gentleman before me already thanked everyone, I will simply thank the gallery itself for being here. Every single one of you in attendance, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest with ourselves, talking to a wall or talking to you, Mr. Speaker, just isn't as fun without the heckling. So having said that, let's go ahead and take a look at the motion that's before us today, that the internet will lead to depersonalization. Now, the honorable gentleman before me got up and he said that it's about culture, and it's about societal interaction. But the problem with that, when we look towards the motion itself, is that even the things that he advocates are still inherently depersonalizing. And at that point, we see that the motion will still stand. So let's go on to the first point where he talks about 4chan. And he says we identify people by things other than their faces. And while this might be true, especially within internet culture, we have to look at 4chan itself. But what the honorable gentleman neglects to talk about is what we say is that there's a culture of anonymity that goes on there. Whenever a person goes to 4chan, they are expected to be anonymous. There are people there that sign up with a username and trying to create an identity for themselves. And they are ragged on, they are made fun of because they try to make an identity. This is depersonalization at its finest. And we see the millions of people that go there, these anonymous people, because they have no face, Because there is no consequence that they think they will not suffer, they go on to commit these heinous acts of going out and bullying people on Facebook, to make fun of the dead, to send things to their grandmother saying they're not dead. These sorts of things is what is depersonalizing. It depersonalizes not only the person who is dead, but it also depersonalizes the grandmother by making her question the dead person's identity, and it depersonalizes the people who committed it themselves. Yeah. This is what the internet does. Then we go on to the next part, and he talks specifically about people choose to be anonymous. This is true. They're choosing to depersonalize themselves. Whether it is a choice or not, it occurs. And when it occurs, the motion stands today. The motion is not that the internet will allow people to give the choice to be depersonalized, merely that it will. And if I walk in here and make the choice to speak, or you have a gun to my head, I'm speaking one way or the other. Therefore, the internet will depersonalize based on that. And he goes on to the next part and he says, well, we can overcome these sorts of things. But what he hasn't shown you is any reason why or how. All he says is that it can. The simple fact of the matter is, anonymous is not something that will be easily overcome, if overcome at all. We see them raining terror every day. We see it on the news when they go in and hack businesses. We see it when they vandalize Facebooks, when they engage in cyberbullying. And the problem with anonymous is we don't know who or what they are. We don't know who it could be. It could be the people in this very crowd. It could even be me. It could be you, Mr. Speaker, even though obviously I would not question your honor like that, sir. Then we go on to the next part here about the recent protest. And what he tries to say is that the previous showman of the government says that it's not important. We never said that the protests were not important. They are extremely important. However, what we do say, what they fail to truly speak about, is this notion that it is the protester. It is not a leader. We have no Mahatma Gandhi. We have no Martin Luther King Jr. We have the protester, the faceless masses. And what they do not speak of is that this was created specifically by the internet. There was no time before this where this truly occurred at the level, at the intensity that it has now that the internet has risen. We can have an entire social movement. The very fabric of our nation can change. Not by a man standing up, a single man, to rally people to his cause, but by thousands of people in a chat room, thousands of people on an image board with a common idea. This is depersonalizing. We don't have this single particular leader. We have faceless millions that are crying out for one thing. It is a good thing, but it is also depersonalizing. And at that point, the motion will stand. Let's go into some of the things the Honorable Gentleman before me said in regards to his case. He talks about interpersonal relationships. And he talks about this entire notion of I am Latino. Therefore, when I hide this, or when I go about and have an identity besides this, then they can truly know me. What we have to understand, unfortunately, is at the point where he doesn't mention his Latino heritage, or any person doesn't mention a part of themselves and creates an identity, they are depersonalizing themselves. They are choosing to deny their own identity. And at this point, the internet creates a wondrous place to do this sort of thing. And whether for good or ill, it is depersonalizing. We never said that depersonalization is totally bad. Remember when we tell you specifically that people with these embarrassing diseases, genital herpes, things of that nature, can go out and seek support without having to be embarrassed. Depersonalization is not necessarily a bad thing, Speaker, but it does occur. And that's what I would like you and everyone in this gallery to remember, is whether for good or bad, it is depersonalizing, and it does happen. And thank you.
Yeah. The chair will now recognize the coalition leader to open for his or her party. ACM.
Giving thanks to the speaker for allowing us to be here today, and to the gallery once again. This issue of depersonalization is a strong issue for us, and I feel like we will take the side of opposition because of these few reasons here. You say that, my opponent said that, the internet will depersonalize society because it will give anonymity. My question to that is, or statement to that rather, is that we are taught that from a child. When we're children, we're taught to dress up and play as action figures on Halloween, or girls are allowed to dress up as princesses and queens, and taught that this is the life that you should lead. You don't give your name, you become Princess Leia, if you will. and so with that, to say that the internet will cause more depersonalization, when you're taught from a child to already separate yourself from society in some facet, then that alone has already started you in that path. The internet allows for people to become anyone in the sense of comfortability. It allows the poorest man to talk to the richest man. It allows lands to communicate amongst all sides of lines through vibrations of metal. Excuse me. So what I'm saying is that the internet will personalize society more than depersonalize society. By way of virtue, I go back into what my opponent says about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. being a figurehead and how Time magazine named him Man of the Year, but when you think about it, who did the work? Who gave the speeches and who did the marching? Dr. King actually stood up and gave a speech of what to do, but the people who were following the footsteps behind him were the true workers of this march. Those people had anonymity. Those people didn't have a face on Time magazine. My grandmother marched in those marches. My grandfather was beaten by those sheriffs, and his face was not on Time magazine, but is he not an important person to that march? Again, I go into depersonalization of the internet. Facebook, Twitter. How many people in this room have already checked in that they are in the Intercontinental Hotel? How many people have already said that their location is New Orleans, Louisiana? This alone allows us to tell people that we are here trying to talk about change. We're here talking about policy. We're here talking about things of the world that not too many people speak on an everyday basis. This will create a conversation amongst many different people in your friend groups, in your friend list, on your Twitter page, asking what was said. This isn't depersonalization. This is people engaging in conversation. And a face or a mask does not make you who you are. For when Shakespeare says, what is in a name? Then what is in a face? Your words are who you are. Your personality is who you are. And if that is who comes out on the internet page, on your Facebook, on your Twitter, or your Foursquare, whomever, then that is who it is. Crime exists everywhere. Crime will not stop. Saying that the internet will make crime become more bigger is elementary thought. Because you have to realize that police exist here and on the internet. That's my theory.
The chair will now recognize the whip of the minority to rebut, or to, in this case, perhaps pile on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, we're so proud on the side of opposition that we're winning this debate on 2 key points. The first one is that the internet is critical to creating new interpersonal relationships, and the second one is that the internet is a unique tool to personalizing society as a whole. As we've seen from the 2 previous speakers on the side opposition of the House, there's been numerous examples of how this is relevant, but I'm going to continue to extend on real-world implications and real-world examples and how we can see this already happening, and that what our friends on the side government bench have tried to tell you about how anonymity makes it worse because we're depersonalizing ourselves isn't in fact true. It's the opposite. The fact is when you log on to the internet and you make the concise choice to represent yourself as who you choose to be, the whole world perceives you in a different way, and we think that's a unique benefit that the internet gives us. So first, let's see how the internet is critical to creating new interpersonal relationships, friendships amongst each other. First, we think a very simple one is dating, right? We've all seen the commercial, 1 in 5 relationships are found on Match.com, right? We think in an ever-increasing technological society that getting picked up in a bar, getting picked up in a bar is not working anymore. We think that the internet is critical to connecting with people all over, whether that's from somebody in your city or somebody in a different state. We think that the very basic need to have a companion is found on the internet through these websites. Furthermore, things like friendships and family, those are continually connected through things like Facebook. Looking at my family and other families around me connecting with people that they haven't seen in years because of divorce or because of moving is astonishing. The fact that you can find cousins and mothers and adopted children all over Facebook or however you want to indicates that the internet is not depersonalizing society, that we're not losing the people around us, that we're not becoming hermits hiding behind our monitors, that we're going out and we're finding new people, families, and connections. And we think this is very important, a key benefit that the internet offers us. Furthermore, we think that this is exemplified globally. I know we're talking a lot about Americans, but A study done in China about 166 Korean students who went there to study used social networking on the internet to formulate new friends in China. So we can see this is a really good example of how someone sat down, used social networking, got up, and found new friends and a new life in their educational setting. I think that's very important. Furthermore, let's see how the internet is a unique tool to personalizing society as a whole. What is the grand scale impacts of what we can see from the internet? Latula Ryan says, he tells you that it's key to identity creation. We say that you can portray yourself how you want to. The unique thing about the internet is that you can go across all those normative barriers we have in society, like your gender, your creed, your class, whatever it is. You don't have to mention those things. You can get along on the fact that you both like Battlestar Galactica without being, disenfranchised because, I don't know, I'm a girl and you're a boy. It doesn't matter. You think that the internet hides across those barriers. Furthermore, we think it goes beyond geological barriers. I think it's fantastic that I have pen pals in New Zealand and England, that I can talk about the internet and how great it is for our relationships. But furthermore, we think that another key aspect of the internet is how it allows for organization and structure. I find it interesting that our friends on the other side of the house mention things like the Arab Spring, or the Green Revolution, or the Occupy movement with criticism, when, quite factually, it's one of the most amazing things we've seen. It doesn't matter if there's not the leader at the top of the Occupy movement taking credit for his wonderful movements. The fact is that hundreds of people globally coalesce over one thing. The fact is, they were angry about their government. It doesn't matter that we can pinpoint what particularly it is. The fact is that they went to the streets at the right time, at the right place, with the right message, to the right people, all because they used the internet to correlate those informations. But furthermore, things like Syria, there is no way that NATO workers, UN workers, or here in the United States, as sitting behind our television, would know the atrocities and crimes that are being committed against protesters in Syria if it wasn't for YouTube, if it wasn't for video cameras, if it wasn't for them posting and risking their lives to connect with us here in the United States so we can know what's going on over there. We think that the ability for the internet to connect us globally, to coalesce as a society and look down and say, Assad, we don't think this is how you should treat your people. We're putting sanctions on you. We did this as a society. We support this as the United States. We think this is a good example of how society as a whole progresses forward by using the internet. So, when we're looking at two sides of the house, unfortunately for our friends on the government bench, it doesn't seem like they have any persuasive reason on why the internet is causing any kind of depersonalization. In fact, not only does it increase our interpersonal relationships through dating, friendships, and family, it helps us as a society as a whole through things against human rights violations, human trafficking, taxes, whatever it is that we want to talk about. It seems that the internet is our only key to solving these problems. Thank you.
The chair will now recognize the coalition whip. Perhaps a rebuttal, perhaps not.
Mr. Speaker, the majority leader, opposition, and my fellow coalition. Mr. Speaker, the majority did indeed point out cases where indeed the internet can indeed depersonalize society. It also can indeed cause many problems within the society. The internet can do many of those things. But if we measure the number of megapixels or megawatts that's used to do that negative thing, it is a very minute portion of the total internet. So now I must look at this side. As the opposition points out very illustriously, she used one key word, Mr. Speaker. It's a tool. Since it's a tool, we need to use this tool appropriately to maximize and benefit the society. Do we take the spanner and break it in half so we can no longer use it to remove bolts? No, we don't do that. We fix the issue. We fix the problem if there's a problem. We identify ways that the internet may have a problem with its usage, and we change its usage. We change the game, so to speak. We change the methods used in the internet. For example, it is said what happens in maybe New Orleans stays in New Orleans. But what happens on the internet doesn't really stay on the internet because the technology is sufficiently in place whereby you can indeed eradicate some of these negative issues. But you cannot deny the value of the internet to much of society right now. You cannot deny the value of the internet to the persons in Syria, in Libya, in Egypt. You can't deny that value. You can't even deny the value of those who call themselves Occupy Wall Street, which I think in this case, we are trying to catch up with Syria, Libya, and so therefore, Mr. Speaker, and members of the majority, we can't just start by and remove this value of this internet. This internet is crucial for learning. It's crucial for persons who have handicaps, persons who have disabilities, persons who can't get along as easy as maybe we can. They can travel to a foreign place, they can travel to mountain tops with the internet. Do we remove that and say it's because it's the personalizing their position? I don't think so. I think we need to increase and expand the internet. I think we need to go a step further in the words of Martin Luther King, where he says, one day we can probably measure, not by if you have a computer, if you have a smartphone, but where we can make access to all. So all can have this value. All can go and look at Google. All can go to the Great Wall of China. All can go to the Yangtze River. All can go to the great and wonderful Grand Canyon. Without the internet, some people will never, ever see this value. So for this reason, Mr. Speaker, the majority's case is certainly not founded. Thank you.
The Speaker would like to recognize the cross-bench spokesperson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would begin by asking a question for the majority. Maybe an odd one, but the question I would ask is, do you want a cookie? By a cookie, I don't mean a sugary treat. What I mean is the cookies that, when we log on online, now get installed wherever we go. The internet of today and the internet of tomorrow is in fact not depersonalizing, but hyper-personalized. And it is because of cookies. It is because of companies like Axiom, which traffic in data so that we can be hyper-personalized in our online activity. It is because of companies like Google that more and more seek to personalize and hyper-personalize our activities. These companies, which have been ignored so far in our discussion, have a very real impact in the way echo chambers form online. And those echo chambers, those political communities, are then the ones that we've been discussing throughout. So the question I would like us to keep in mind as I offer these thoughts is, do you want a cookie? Online, the answer time and time again has been yes, we do, because we want that personalization. Axiom is a company that has been mentioned by several authors talking about the future of the internet. I'm thinking of here of Eli Pariser, Cass Sunstein, Joseph Turow. Pariser came out with a book in 2011, Turow just this past week actually, 2012, titled The Daily You. Clearly, hyper-personalized, not depersonalized, The Daily You. And they talk about this company, Axiom, which traffics in data. They gather data on what we look at online. And they use that data, they sell that data to companies like Amazon so that they can customize. So that when we visit Amazon, when we visit the Washington Post, when we visit Slate, wherever we go online, what I see is no longer what you see. We get a more and more personalized experience. This is now true for Google as well. If each of us had a laptop here, and unlike my classroom at Rutgers, I see that we don't all have our laptops out. But if each of us had a laptop out right now and we were to type the same term into Google, we would get different rankings, different results. Right? We would get personalized results. That's whether we're logged in or not. If we're logged in, it's because of the cookies. If not, Google has 57 different signals it uses to try to triangulate who is this person, what are their interests, and they serve you information based on it. Pariser tells the interesting story, given that we've been talking about the Arab Spring, of two friends of his who typed in Iran during the Iranian Revolution, or during the challenge to the Iranian ballots in 2009. One of them received news information about what was going on in Iraq. The other one received travel information. That is a personalized internet, hyper-personalized, in fact. The reason why this is important is because there is an internet of the past, the internet of the 1990s, an internet of the present, and the internet of the future. We are here today discussing the internet of the future. The internet of the past was an internet where anonymous was a real problem, where what we needed to concern ourselves with was this anonymity, and that all of us online were losing some identity, That's the internet that Bob Putnam in Bowling Alone was concerned with. That internet went away, though. That internet changed. The internet is a continually changing communications mechanism. Since 2003 or so, what we've seen with the internet more and more is the use of online information for offline activities. So in the lead up to the 2004 election, the Democratic primaries, we saw with Howard Dean and Meetup.com that people were using the internet no longer to be anonymous, but instead to go and engage with each other offline. With Howard Dean, they were going and meeting offline to try to affect an election. But they were also going and meeting offline in order to have bowling clubs, bowling leagues. My guess is that if one of us had a laptop here with us now and we typed in, if we went to meetup.com and typed in New Orleans bowling, we would in fact find an internet-mediated group that gets people to go bowling together more. Bowling together. That is not to say that the internet of the 1990s was not depersonalizing, but the internet of the future is hyper-personalized. Going along with this, what I would suggest to you on the case of 4chan. 4chan is a good example of the danger of anonymous, though I would caution you that anonymous is not quite the same as depersonalized. I would, however, have to ask, can you give me another example? And the reason is because 4chan is a very special case. 4chan is an online community. It is a group organized online. There are lots of online communities, lots of groups organized online. Part of what makes 4chan so odd and special, though, is that they are the only one that is anonymous. If you were to look at the Tea Party, what you'd see is people there are logging on under new usernames. If you were to look at a political blog like dailycoast.com, people create usernames. More and more now, they actually use their real names in that. Same with redstate.com on the right. Online communities are primarily people who are engaging with each other online, translating it offline. And whereas in the 1990s they were often anonymous, that chat room culture has sunset. And today it is a culture in which more and more of our data is being shared with each other. One reason I believe why we are sharing more and more with each other is because we know that our data is being more and more shared with these companies like Accent, like Google. The internet of today, the internet tomorrow, is one which is hyper-personalized. And we are using that to engage with one another offline. We're using that for social movements like the Arab Spring, like Occupy Wall Street. But to call that depersonalized raises the question for me, what is it that we mean exactly by depersonalization? If we were to ask anybody in the Occupy Wall Street movement, and this is something they've talked about, they would tell you we are not a leader-less movement. We are a leader-full movement. That is language that they used on online blogs and news websites when interviewed throughout this past fall. They said, we are not leaderless, we are leader-full. And while it's correct that the image from with Time magazine was of the protester, not of an individual protester, and that may tell us that social movements have changed thanks to changes in communications technology. I do not believe that the proposition has made the case that that change is necessarily depersonalizing. It is different, but why are we to call that difference depersonalized, when instead it is just easier to engage with their fellow citizens? Members of the Occupy Wall Street movement have been camping out, spent months and months camping out in tents. There's nothing depersonalizing about that. So the final note that I would make again is that the concern for us is this internet of the future. The latest scholarship on all of this is suggesting to us that depersonalization is a thing of the past. And in fact, what should worry us is these echo chambers. The news that a liberal going to Daily Kos receives about what constitutes American politics today is very different than the news that a conservative visiting Red State receives about American politics today. They are not just seeing different frames of the day's issues. They are in fact reading about different topics. And their readership habit, because of cookies, then feeds into news websites, that when those news websites see them coming, they can serve up articles tailored to their political interests. This is moving the left and the right further and further apart. It is creating echo chambers that we, this chamber, should be concerned about. But that is because it is a hyper-personalized internet, not because it is a depersonalized internet. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The speaker will now open up the floor for comments. We'll start with the majority, who's had some major defections from the majority over the course of the debate. So, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would first like to rebut against the leader of the gentleman in the rear. Langdon Winter has said that the internet though limitless in its potential power, is essentially a tool without a handle. It is not a hammer, sir. It is the head of a hammer, of which you can either build or you can use as a weapon. In order to rebut the crossbench speaker, he is misassociating the word personalized with the word tailored. Google has tailored the internet to us. It has not made it personal to us. Any educator in this room can identify the fact that teaching students of the millennial generation, these young people cannot even look you in the eye when they speak to you. Critical thinking has been a central feature of many of the debates that we've had at this conference and this weekend outside of this parliament. You cannot teach critical thinking. The internet is not aiding in critical thinking. The father of virtual reality, Jared Lanier, has said that the Googleization of data is leading to this mental deficit. Any young woman in this room can identify the fact that these young men do not have any game when they go to the bar. They don't know how to speak to you in person. They can't even look you in the eye and buy you a drink. There's no personalization based on the internet. Over there. There's no personalization by way of the internet. These people occupy Wall Street. Yes, they can get together, but these are strong tie foundations in the terms of granted letter. These are weak tie foundations. They're not strong ties. I teach in Manhattan. Those people went home once the barriers were taken down. So while, yes, there are some successes, let's not forget in the Arab Spring, a young man by the name of Mohammed Bouazi immolated himself on fire. That was the driving force to get those Tunisians to the street. That was the driving force to get the Egyptians to the street. It was not simply Facebook. It was not simply Twitter. This is why the Iranian Revolution had disintegrated in the face of the CG violence. There is no personality towards the internet. These young people are not thinking. They cannot talk to you unless you ask them by email, and all of a sudden a wealth of information pours down on the page. They can never deliver you that information out in person. They can never look you in the eye and have these conversations with you. And this is a tragedy. This is why this motion must pass. Our young people are suffering in the face of internet technology. We are not saying that we need leader movements. We are not saying that the Occupy movements are not positive. We're not saying that the Arab Spring is not positive. But there has to be more. Who creates the new government? Who creates the new thoughts? In Egypt, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, an old school pre-internet existence that is found in the new foundations of Egypt. It's not the people that were on Facebook. It's not the protesters. That's why they're out protesting again. If they had gotten what they wanted because of the internet, they would not be back on the streets. It is the old school people getting together. It is the people that are driving down to the protest. It is the people that are healing the wounds. These things cannot be done on the internet alone. Her Majesty's government is not saying that the internet is not essential or is not important. However, we have to take stock of the fact that there's a communication gap that is happening because of the internet. These people are not being able to communicate their ideas, their thoughts, their feelings. They cannot look you in the eye and say, I love you anymore, because eHarmony is taking care of that for us. This is becoming a tragedy to our society. That is why this motion must pass.
Chair recognizes the lady from the majority.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I believe we've lost a little focus today, and we speak about all of the positive things that the internet can do, and yes, that's fine. But we go back to what the true meaning of humanization, what makes us individuals today is. And the fact is that recognition of essence is what makes the individual. Today, I know that I am my mother's daughter because she recognizes me to be her daughter. Recognition is what's important. The opposition today wants to play a game of numbers. They say, because this huge numbers of people are able to communicate through the internet, that increases personalization. But the truth is that today, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I will probably not know the names of the majority of you today. And the people that I know most personally will be my teammates, the people that I have been able to speak one-on-one today, instead of the hundreds of people. So we can see this as an important point today. Humanization is, an important part of humanization is recognition, the fact that we know the essence of a person. And when we can see that this is broken through the internet because of this anonymity, because we can change who we are, not only that, because there's hundreds of people on the internet and all of this information gets mishmashed, then there's no true humanization. We go on to the gentleman in the brown coat's information about cookies and all of that. But the fact is that another important part of humanization is the fact of choice, free will, privacy. The fact that I can choose to give my information to whoever, that my essence is free given to me to give to whoever I wish is important. And the opposition brings up the point. He says all of these companies are able to give our information, are able to use our information. Well, that's the point. No longer am I allowed this will to give my essence to whomever I please, but companies are turning me into dollar signs and giving my information to anybody. I am no longer a human being, I am simply another number given for a name tag. So this is the important reason why today we must see this information pass. We are not saying that the internet has, we are not debating today the negatives or positives of the internet, but simply that today the internet is reducing our humanization. There are people on the internet, we're becoming a binary instead of names, instead of essence, instead of recognition. Thank you.
Sir, the chair recognizes the man for the majority.
Notice the silence of the opposition. They have no arguments.
Well, I'd like to start off by once again thanking everybody for coming out here to the opposition. As has just recently been said, is mostly silent, but I'm not complaining. So what I'd like to first off start about is bring back the focus of what this debate should be about, which is we're not talking about whether or not the internet is good or the internet is bad, because we've heard a lot of that on both sides. But what we'd like to focus on in today's debate round is saying whether or not this is, the internet creates further depersonalization. And has been said on both sides, this creates both good things and bad things. It can help have someone anonymously overcome a drug addiction, or it can spam the families of the recently deceased. That's not, the good and the bad is not what we're going to be talking about here today. What we need to be focusing on is whether or not depersonalization is increasing or decreasing throughout society. That's the first thing I'd like to be looking at. The second thing is focusing on what all the last four speakers of the opposition talked about, which is saying that you can create this mask, which is some sort of idea of personalization. That's absolutely not true. That's absolutely not true. When we look at the people of Anonymous that are actually going out there today, they all wear Guy Fawkes masks when they're actually seen in real life. Why? Because they have created this depersonalized mask where they can come on anonymously and sure they're actually doing things, they're getting things done. Sometimes, different organizations can actually be doing good things, but the point is they're hiding behind these masks. They're not showing their true selves, and that's basically the definition of depersonalization. Another thing I'd like to point out, even though there were 4 speeches all given in a row by the opposition, we saw no response to point 3, which was brought up by the first speaker, the Prime Minister of this debate round. There has been no response to the fact that multiplayer organizations the multiplayer online games are completely depersonalized. There was no response from those specific points. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk to you about, this response of the supposed crossbench spokesperson, or the crossbench spokesperson said, saying that it's going to create this more personalized society. The only thing that he brought up was these 52 different flags that are going to be created. When you search in Google, it uses 52 different things to create a quote-unquote personality. Now, I, being an individual who many people on my team have talked to, I've met a lot of you here, I am comprised of more than 52 different facets. There are more than 52 things about me, and sure, some search group might find out that I am 57, I'm sorry. 57, yes, I'm more than 57 different things. So, sure, you might find that I'm a college student, or a Republican, or some of the other things, but the internet only creates me as a statistic. And sure, it's becoming a more advanced statistic, but it's still not the personalization that we would have in real life. Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes the leader of the minority.
much of the reason we remain silent on this side is because we're curious to see how the affirmative was going to dig themselves out of the hole they put themselves into. Unfortunately, they did a pretty poor job of doing that. They never give any sort of explicit reason as to why a name and a face is key to a person's identity and why that is necessary to personalize societies. I think it's also kind of interesting that they bring that up during Mardi Gras when everyone's wearing masks. It makes me wonder how personalized this city is if that's going to be their standard of personalization. We've given you plenty of reasons across the board as to why personalization goes far beyond the name and the face. And in fact, that's oftentimes why people don't even get a job, is because their resume is limited to their name, maybe a profile picture, I don't know. But whenever people are given the opportunity to personify the other aspects of themselves, the parts that they believe as individuals as being important to their own identity, we think this sort of actualization is comparatively far more personalized than the society that they seem to suggest. They seem to assume that just because individuals can claim anonymity, all of a sudden society is depersonalized. We think that there are people who claim anonymity without the internet already. There are people that's why we came up with the word like hermits, like people who just refuse to socialize within society. But we think that the use of the internet is a means of people now socializing. People who refuse to have a social life, or perhaps had an inability to have a social life, now have the ability to connect with others by finding people with their common interests. And as they said, finding people with their common disabilities. We think that this sort of discourse that is created as a result of the interchange of ideas and the interchange of concepts that goes back and forth between these individuals is how we personalize society.
Here, here.
So ultimately, we think that the internet does two things. First of all, we think it allows us to define ourselves as people, and then secondly, we think it allows us to better define our social relationships. If we can meet these two standards of definition, both on an individual level and on a social level, we think that this necessarily means that societies are becoming more personalized and increasingly personalized, especially when compared to the world absent the internet. So if their argument is that we can't come up here and claim good things that happen on the internet, we're not just claiming them to do good and bad, we're claiming them to show how all these positive things directly indicate that personalization is increasing. We're not claiming them as virtues within and of themselves. We're saying that these are case studies, these are facts that prove this to be the case. Their only response seems to be that we didn't engage the example of online games being depersonalized, but I think that if I can create an avatar that personifies myself and that I individually made, that's pretty personal to myself. And furthermore, we're not going to play the semantic game about this being tailored as opposed to personalized. This suit was tailored, but it's also personalized to me. I think that's perfectly fine. So either way, at the end of the debate, we're going to see that the ability to define ourselves and the ability to engage that definition with the rest of society proves the case that personalization increases. Thank you.
Here, here. It's ready, then we'll go over the majority. Chair recognizes the speaker from the minority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my right honorable friends in the government, let me remind you that you have the greater burden here. These propositions suggest that the internet will lead to an increasing depersonalization in society. May I suggest that the opposition itself occupies what we might call the null hypothesis, the status quo. And let me remind you as well that, that in demonstrating that a tool can lead to increasing depersonalization, we would think that you would be willing to appeal to prior history. The fact of the matter is, though, that prior history of increases in technology have actually not led to necessarily increasing depersonalization in history. An excellent example is the introduction of publishing materials and books. The widespread distribution of the, I can't think of the right term.
Bits and bytes.
Yeah. So the Gutenberg Bible and the introduction of the increase in technology and publication did not lead to a decrease in personalization. It actually led to a renaissance, to a period of enormous growth of art and technology. As well, did the carrier pigeon or the telegraph or any other of the various technologies that have historically run their course, did they lead to a depersonalization in the same way? Only using that evidence can we come to the conclusion as to whether the internet will lead to depersonalization. And I have not seen any evidence presented at this point which justifies that claim. So, okay.
Speaker. The leader of the opposition has repeatedly asked, what is the problem with taking away a person's name? How does that take away their identity? And the previous speaker asked about history, so I'd like to combine the answers. Look at what we did to the African people we brought over to make slaves. What was the first thing we did to depersonalize them, to take them away? What did the Nazis do to the Jews? They took away their name and gave them a number.
Here, here.
That is depersonalization. At the point where you take away your name, you take away your identity. Malcolm X, Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali to abandon his, quote, his slave name, the name given to him to reclaim his identity, to reclaim his name as a black Muslim. Malcolm X did the exact same thing. A name, at the point where they make light of this, that the name is not part of their identity, and yet go around, and what we do when we came in here, we all shook hands and introduced ourselves by name. Furthermore, this concept that we don't lead to depersonalization, I ask you, why are we here? If we can have just as much personalization, or according to the opposition, further personalization online than offline, then why is this debate not over Skype? Why are we here right now? In fact, to take it a step further, if eHarmony works so well, why meet the person at all? Why not just get married online? The simple matter is, the reason we don't get married online, we don't have these conferences online, we don't have this debate online, is because we recognize personalization, identity, recognizing us coming here and being together is a lot different than us all logging on to 4chan and uploading pictures of what we think about these topics. So when we look at these things here, the question here is not, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? The question is, will the internet continue to lead to advances in depersonalization? The more we get on, the more we log on, the more we log into Facebook, and the more cookies we give off to these people. By the way, I use ad blocker, so they get no cookies from me. That leads to us becoming these numbers. I'm not a name to Google. I'm not a name to Amazon. It's not like the corner store or the corner market where I walk in, because this suit is tailored too. And I have a person who works the store many miles from where I go, and I pass several stores on the way to get there. Because that person personalizes my shopping experience. She knows my name when I walk in, she knows the styles I wear, because we've actually interacted, not because Google told her so. That is personalization, and it occurs because I didn't use the internet. I actually went and showed up just as we showed up today. So I clearly invite the opposition. We can set up a nice Skype monitor for them to tweet in on. If they really believe that they can achieve the same amount of personalization, invite them to stop making speeches and stick it on Twitter and start hitting @thisdebate #conference. Thank you.
So the chair recognizes the coalition whip.
Mr. Speaker, I was contented in sitting for the rest of the debate, but the illustrious majority leaders made a statement that courts need to stand. His thesis at the end, the second time, indicated the African slaves, that they took their names away. Please, sir, Mr. Speaker, to speak of depersonalization based on taking their names away is totally correct. What they did, though, was to take away knowledge, take away technology, take away books, take away learning, take away reading, take away writing. To use that as your basis to say, then it is depersonalizing, is to say, it's just totally the opposite. Because we need the internet to move information forward, to move communication forward. What did those same Africans who they took their names away did? They used signals, again, the internet. They used an internet language that's how they communicated. What the internet has done now is to move this language to a place where it can reach so many more people. Our leader said very clearly the internet has been used to move information. They speak of the personalization. If you look at Facebook right now, today, this morning, the telephone, you search someone else, you don't see blank faces. You see people's faces, you see friends together. So to say it's depersonalized and based on some blank spot. Many persons who have no picture on their Facebook, it's because they're trying to figure out how to upload their picture. That's why it's not there. They want the picture. They want someone. People trying to move to a place where this depersonalization depersonalization, which may have been happening, as pointed out in the 90s. They're trying to move the place to make it connect. They're trying to make it a real place now, where people can see each other, where they can speak to each other, where they can transfer information. So I would not use the example of the slaves, of the Africans of the names. The key thing is to remove the communication, remove information. And it is one place that drives communication and it drives information. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, once again, the majority has a very, very weak case. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from the majority.
Mr. Speaker, members of the opposition and the rest of the gallery, that of the government. What we have to look at is whether or not we are being personalized or depersonalized through the internet. When you're little, when you're growing up, you have 4 or 5 friends who live down the block, right? You have all these friends. You know their names, you know their faces, you know whether or not they got a haircut, the color of their eyes, how they move their hands. Now when we're on the internet, when we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, or whenever, we look at something that the opposition said earlier, whether or not they're going to hire somebody. Whenever you bring somebody in to hire them, you want to look at their face, their hand touch, what they're going to say to you, whether or not they're actually lying, whether they're telling the truth. What we have to see is the internet is depersonalizing us. One of the bases of human communication is through nonverbal communication. You don't get that nonverbal communication through typing out an email, through tweeting, through putting a notification on your Facebook. You get that nonverbal communication and an ideal of personalization through human contact. Now the internet is taking our human contact away from us. Now the opposition may get up here and say that it actually brings in more communication. We can talk to the rest of the world. While that may be true, we are not being personal on the internet. Now, as the opposition also brought up earlier, that they can become friends with other people across the world by hiding a part of their identity. Now, when we look towards what the opposition was saying, is that they want to hide a part of their identity, much like many people hide their identity when they want to protest out to something. They hide it behind their Guy Fawkes masks. They hide behind their anonymous names. That is what the internet has done to us. It has made us no less of our name. It has made us less of our eyes. It has made us less of our hands, of our touch, and of our human essence. The internet has depersonalized us. Now, while we may have these cookies that follow us, give us these 57 red flags, it is not what you want. It is not walking into a store and having somebody know your name, somebody know who your family is. It is us not being personalized. Sure, it may be a great way to advance in the future, but again, it is not us. It is not a human. It is not anything. It is just merely technology, binary codes. It is not personalized. So what we have to see is that we have to move towards the government and realize that the internet is depersonalizing and will continue to depersonalize, because in all reality, when we do look at human nature, it is speaking, it is talking, it is giving a hand touch, it is personalization. So again, when we look towards this, we must move towards the government. Thank you.
Well said.
Chair doesn't understand cookies, but does recognize prospect.
Are you supposed to be speaking across the bench, not just for the opposition?
Order. Sir, go right ahead.
I would suggest to the chair that at this point we are engaging in a series of false binaries. The motion, as I will read here, is the internet will lead to an increasing depersonalization of society. I see nothing in that statement that suggests we are choosing between Skype-based conversations and real conversations. If the proposal was, let's all move to Skype and only Skype, then I don't believe there would be anyone on this side of the room. So while I understand the urge to reframe and change the question, it is not the question before us. Likewise, I would agree with the earlier speaker in the pink, right? But I would I would agree that in many ways the internet can be dehumanizing. But personalization filters, and that's what they're called, personalization filters. To say that personalization filters are dehumanizing does not mean that then the internet is depersonalizing. Personalization and humanization are two very different things. Likewise, I am still waiting for another example besides 4chan of these online communities being anonymous. Yes, the 4chan people wear Guy Fawkes masks. Can you give us another example, since there are so many myths out there? On the topic of online gaming, I was a nerdy kid growing up and played lots of video games. They were all spent alone. That was time that I was spending just with my computer. These new multiplayer games, though they are not the same sort of social as playing ball outside with your friends, those are now more social games than we had in the past. So it seems to be a large jump to go from there to say, therefore, the internet of the future will be depersonalized.
Thank you. The chair recognizes a member of the jury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect to the crossbench speaker, I'd like to say that yes, there's more games being played, but they're played through Xbox Connect, and PlayStation Move. They're bowling, but they're bowling at home. It is social, but it is not personal. With all due respect to the leader of the coalition, yes, there is a new language on the internet, but the people of the millennial generation, they bring that with them to the public sphere. They now speak with lol and JK. How many people have received an email that should have been more professional in manner that was written in text speak? This becomes a problem for the further of our generation. In rebuttal to the honorable gentleman, Speaker of the Leader of the Opposition, the Gutenberg Bible is a great format to understand the centralization of media. That was the beginning of what has now become the Googleization of data. We don't know what was missing from the Gutenberg Bible. We do not know. If you remove one word from every chapter in any text, the meaning of the text changes completely. How do we know that Google Books is doing an honorable copy of these great documents? How do we know in future generations, as libraries move digital, that somebody just doesn't edit a word here and there? Someone in Google changes the context. How do we know 20, 30 years from now? There are many people in this room right now, educators and professors, who are frustrated after spending 2 years working hard on research that they don't make it into the top 10 of Google Scholar. How do people find your work? Just ask Rick Santorum what happens when he becomes Googleized and someone types in his last name and he doesn't get him on his personal webpage. Ask him how he felt when that became his life. And to the front bench speaker here, while he says that many people might have been able to get jobs and opportunities based on Facebook, let me tell you that there are probably 3 times as many people who have lost opportunities. When Katie goes to apply to the Metropolitan Police Department, and during her background investigation, they opened up a spreadsheet and says, "Is this you doing the cake stand?" And now you have lost that opportunity. Was that the identity that she had meant to send out to those people? Was that her personality? Was this is who she wanted to represent? The answer will usually be no, but this is what has happened. When people start identifying the internet as who you are, it takes away who you are. You are more than an avatar. You are more than 57 points of data. You are a person. The internet is taking that away from us. So I approach the gentleman here from the crossbench again. The motion might say that we're trying to prove that there's an increasing depersonalization based on the internet. The government argues that it has already happened.
Chair recognizes the gentleman.
Thank you, honorable colleagues. Entertaining debate so far. It's been said there's 10 kinds of people in the world. Those who understand digital and those who don't. It's a binary joke, actually. If the word person were a single thing that was static throughout history, this debate would be great. We are persons, we're losing the internet, certainly. But matter of fact, the word person has been very dynamic and changing. 200 years ago, the majority of the people in this room would not be recognized by person by our Constitution. You could not vote, you could not own property, you could not walk down the street. In many parts of the world right now, the word person is a restricted thing. So the word person is historically a dynamic, changing thing. The philosopher Hegel has told us that in one time, only the pharaoh or the king or the chief was a person. Then it expanded. The aristocrats are people. Then the royalty are people. Then it's expanded more and more and more. And as it expands, the notion of person had changed. The notion of identity changes. It's a dynamic thing. When reading and writing came about, that changed our identity too. Those who could read had power over those who couldn't. And we kept reading and writing from various races, from slaves, from women, from all sorts of folks. And we denied native languages. You know, in New Orleans, in the old days here, people were not allowed to speak French. French was discouraged in the schools because it was not as good as English. So because identity is something dynamic, I would say the internet is not depersonalizing, it's simply repersonalizing. Another chapter, whatever personalization is. You know, and tonight, when we talk about repersonalizing or what it's robbing us from, tonight, many soldiers and sailors and people all over the globe will get on their Skype and they'll be home with their wife and kids, and the cats will scratch the screens and in a way they hadn't done before. It's kind of a wonderful thing. But I'd just like to end with a great joke. There's a joke in the New York where I was thinking about, give a little fodder for the opposition here, my friends here, the government. There's a great cartoon in the New Yorker. There's a dog sitting at the computer, a dog sitting at the desk. The dog at the computer says to him, "It's great on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." Thank you.
Here, here.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the majority.
I can't pass up the opportunity to compare nerd credentials. So don't be the target individual. It's coming right at you, okay? While you were playing video games, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons. Here, here, here. If I may quote The Breakfast Club, that may have been demented and sad, but social. We were sitting at the same kitchen table, eating from the same bowl of Fritos, sharing the same 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew. We were in each other's presence, we saw each other's body language, and we connected as friends, as comrades, as fellow elves and dwarves and magic users and so on. So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, I want to say that 5 years ago, I would have been on the opposition side of this issue. And that's because not only am I a little nerdy, but I'm also a bit vain. And every so often, I Google myself. Can't help it. 5 years ago, when I Googled myself, I would see maybe a page and a half of results, and almost every single line was me. I could see the school that I taught at. I could see a conference I attended, an article I wrote, a class I had attended, a marathon I had run, things that were me. Nowadays, when I Google my name, I get pages and pages and pages of stuff that aren't me. They're things that computers, programmed by advertisers and marketers, who have taken bits and pieces of information of who I am, think that they know who I am, and spitting stuff back out at me that is only remotely somehow connected to who I am, does not capture me as a person at all. So in that way, on a personal level, to talk about depersonalization, I feel hugely depersonalized by the way, not my opportunities to make my position on the internet, but how I am treated by these computers and these marketers and these other organizations that think they know me, but don't.
Chair recognizes the lady from the opposition.
The opposition talks about depersonalization. I would like to talk about depersonalization a little bit. They mentioned the story of the teenagers who committed suicide because of things said online. And then a student or a young lady going online and Facebooking the grandmother. I can't think of anything more personal but damaging than that. Secondly, the Chinese man that comes across the globe to seek education here in the United States because it will better his career, leaving his wife and child in China to continue the child's education. Thousands and thousands and hours away, that Chinese man is able to talk to his family and communicate with his son over Skype. So what is more personal than being able to see your children when you are hours and hours away?
Here, here.
Chair recognizes the lady from the minority.
With regard to somebody who, I believe it was in the purple shirt and the suit, was talking about having friends down the block who you'd always see. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about, and the majority has been talking about here, relates to the idea this is taking away my ability to, in person, communicate with my community, with my friends. And I respectfully think that we are excluding from that people who did not have friends on their block. And the people who do not have access to professors in their community. Maybe you are from a place that doesn't have a school, that doesn't have people who are interested in the same things that you are. And I think that because the internet is a tool, if you don't want to meet your friends online, if you don't want to meet your spouse online, if you don't want to have conversations online, you don't need to, but that doesn't mean that we should take away this tool from people who are in communities that do not have the opportunity to engage personally, in person, with people who believe the same things as them, who are interested in different things than they are, and to have access to the kind of high-quality, in-person relationships that maybe we are all very blessed to have. I think we should not take away the ability for others to have that as well. Thank you.
opposition. The first is this notion that we are advocating, Mr. Speaker, that we want to take the internet away. We want to somehow deprive people of a tool. This has never been the case. We never once advocated a policy or advocated a position that said we should get rid of the internet, merely that the internet was doing certain things. But it is ludicrous to say that a bomb does not lead towards death, and it is ludicrous to say that the internet does not lead towards personalization. They even say that people choose specifically to take on this anonymity. At the point where they choose it, they are affirming today, and they are saying that the motion is, in fact, true. Now, to the cross-bench speaker, you asked for another example, and you were still waiting. Well, sir, I will be happy to provide. First of all, you can look towards 4chan, you can look towards other sites, not ran by Booth, the person who runs 4chan. You can look towards 7chan, 14chan, 32chan. All of these things, different message boards stolen from the idea of 4chan with different communities that do the same thing. Now, these communities form, and they do the same sort of thing, but 4chan is the one that's big and well known. The other ones are smaller, but they do the same sort of thing. If we're going with nerd credentials, I too have played D&D. In fact, I still do today. But I'm also one of those people that has been to 4chan before. I've seen the sorts of things that they do. God knows I don't do some of the terrible things on there that we've seen come out of there, and I'm most certainly not a member of Anonymous, but we do see that this branches from these online communities. Before the internet, this was a unique case where the internet allowed for this anonymity to spread to the level that it has now. So, the other thing that I would really like us to understand today is this whole notion of the internet takes away from one's identity. And there is a difference. I will have this semantic debate with the opposition about the difference between tailored and personalized. Just because something is tailored to us, just because someone may be 57 factors, I am so much more than that, I can tell you personally, and I would hope that all of us in here are better than 57 things. So while the internet may be tailored to us, even hyper-tailored, that now advertisements are better for us, that still turns us into nothing more than a statistic. Amazon does not know Jeremy Scott Kaufman, the debater. It knows a person with 57 different particular interests that may want to be advertised to in a certain way. This does not increase our personalization. This does not increase personalization as we defined it at the beginning to be that of identity. Just because advertisements or news may come to me, this does not increase my identity on the internet or anything like that. So at this point then, we have to understand that the internet takes away from our identity. It turns us into a statistic. It turns us into 57 different points. Phenomenal then, that my advertisements can be better. But does it increase my identity or anything like that? No, it does not. And finally, to address the other gentleman who asked about the future, and he said, well, we're not talking about what's going on today, and that's true, but we can look towards the fact that the internet is growing. These things are growing. 4chan is growing. 7chan is growing. Anonymous is growing. So at this point, then, we see that in the future, because of this growing trend, this will likely happen. World of Warcraft now is up to 12 million players. I've played that. I've played the Old Republic, which just came out, about every other MMO you could possibly think of. And I will tell you, then, that this does take away from a man or a woman's identity. I am not a night elf warrior. I am a human being. But the simple fact of the matter is, I can recreate my identity, but I lose the original one. There are people that have shut themselves in for 3 days straight playing these games. A man in the 90s played EverQuest to the point where his character came out of his screen, and he saw this character outside, and he wrote a letter, a suicide note, detailing what he saw before he jumped out of a window. He was so depersonalized, his identity so compromised, that he could not tell the difference between reality and a virtual world anymore. And this did not happen before the internet, unless you, sir, can think of a D&D character that just snapped off the handle. I certainly cannot. So at this point, then, we have to see that the internet does this. MMORPGs do this sort of thing. Then we look towards the future. The Old Republic came out on December 20th, and within 2 days of its launch, it had over 1 million players. 1 million people lining up to depersonalize themselves, to become something else. Now, at this point, then, we see that this growing trend, this future objective, this internet of the future, as it is called, is indeed one that is depersonalizing. So to answer your question finally, sir, I would love a cookie. But I would like one that is tailored to me. Perhaps one my mother baked, or at least someone I knew in person. And I would like a little more than 57 ingredients.
The chair is concerned making fewer than 57 ingredients, but recognizes the lady from the middle.
I think there's 2 points that we on side opposition need to identify. First, that the government side has conceded that the internet is critical to creating face-to-face relationships and concedes that it helps shape identities. Furthermore, I think it's interesting that the government benches keep telling us that we don't need to weigh whether or not it's good or bad, just whether or not it's happening. I would like to posit a hypothesis that perhaps they don't have any reasons on why their side is good. I think it's interesting that many of the speakers that have come from this side have identified themselves personally as online gaming nerds, right? This is something they've identified themselves with by saying they participated in online video games, that something they did on the internet now translates to an identity they hold in this room. I think that's something to identify yourself with, showing that the internet doesn't depersonalize you, but in fact gives you another characteristic that we all share a laugh about, right? Personally, I can share with you the way I spent my summer wasn't on the river or hanging out. I was spent in a college dorm playing D&D, right? Okay? But the reason I found a D&D group was because I found it online, and we all decided to meet in person, right? This is another example of how the internet helped me find friendships and create new relationships. It seems that the government side has conceded all of these. Furthermore, we think that everyone identifies themselves online in certain ways. They keep telling you that people are hiding behind different masks. We don't think that's true. We think people are choosing to identify themselves in different ways, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that. Just because you were given the birth name of, let's say, Devin, but you like your middle name Charlotte, you can change your Facebook name to Charlotte, and that's a way for you to personalize yourself out there. We think these are all kinds of ways that you can shape your identity. You can go beyond the realms of which you've been given yourself. The next thing we have to think about is that internet itself thrives on personalization. If you don't have any invested interest in the internet, you wouldn't come home after work and log on. I think that's the point of the internet, is how much personalization occurs. But furthermore, we think that the reason that things like our debate isn't online is probably because beer isn't online, and we all know beer to do that afterwards. But what is interesting is teaching hospitals, when they're doing surgeries that are particularly interesting and unique, they tweet how the surgeries are going to other medical intern students. We think that's a very interesting example of how the internet not only is personal, but helps educate as well. So while we may not be debating there, there's plenty of medical students around the world learning on how to do procedures I can't pronounce because I don't know much about science. Furthermore, we think that the internet is unique because it has user-generated content. The gentleman who mentioned the woman who couldn't become a police officer because she was doing a keg stand, I think, perhaps put that content out there because she thought it proved some sort of dexterity. But we think that when people put these images and this information out there, it's the content that they themselves generate as part of an identity they want to pay for themselves. Now, whether they do that in their adolescence and regret it in their adult years, that's something I can't say. But the fact is that they're making a concise effort to give themselves an online personality that they want people to know. So the woman in the pink sweater may or may not know me now, but if you Facebook me, you're sure to learn a lot about me because I put that content out there for you to know. In the end, the internet thrives on personalization, and we think it's a good thing that it's personalizing society as a whole. Everyone identifies themselves, and they use the internet so everyone can know who they are.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the minority. Or Mr. Prime Minister. Majority, I should say. I said majority. Mine.
I think the internet's depersonalized me. I wanted to this guy can kind of give you a deal, which is kind of what you want out of parliamentary debate, and both sides on here, and I'm kind of hoping the crossbench spokesperson will use his special powers and come over, because he's the one who can. However, I think he's been, he's made some valid points here. But one of the things I want to address here really is more of a philosophical question of what is, personalization, because we've talked about that and semantics and everything. A big point here is the concept that it increases communication, but communication with each other using the internet does not distinctly make a person a person. For instance, chimps at the San Diego Zoo have been taught to use iPads using FaceTime to have video chats using sign language with other chimpanzees. Now, unless the opposition would like to get up here and argue that internet communication somehow makes those chimps more human, then we can clearly see that it has nothing to do with humanity at the point where you can simply have a Skype conversation. Instead, what we have to look at here is what is personalization. Again, my esteemed colleague here talked about wanting a cookie, one made by his mother, because his mother knows him. She doesn't just know a list of characteristics about him. In fact, just knowing a list of characteristics about a person doesn't make you have a relationship with them. I could probably go and find a lot of teenage girls who could tell me lots of characteristics about the guy who played Edward or Jacob in Twilight, but that doesn't mean they have a personal relationship with that person. Furthermore, if you have a lot of information, if I knew 57 things about you, sir, that I didn't get from talking to you personally, I'd probably be a stalker. That's not and that's exactly what we're encouraging here. The internet's not personalizing. Google's not personalizing you. Google is stalking you. And that's exactly what we have to see here. Google is not your friend. Google is, these people that we talk to on, online, the ones that we don't have in real life conversations, these are not people. I ask you guys, all of you have Facebook. Are there people you have on there who are your Facebook friends that you wouldn't know if they walked up to you right now? Sure. I saw a popular meme come out that says, just because I accepted your friend request doesn't mean I want to chat with you. There are plenty of people out there that we may meet at this meeting. And it doesn't mean we have a personal relationship just because we exchange Facebooks and become Facebook friends. I think it's more akin to what Twitter calls it. You're not really a friend, you don't have a personal relationship, you're simply following the person. You're paying attention to the person, but that's not a personal relationship. That's the whole point of the internet. We fooled ourselves, as we talked about in Bowling Alone, which is still the same internet here today. We have fooled ourselves into thinking that just because I have 1,000 Facebook friends, I must be popular. Just because a lot of people read my post, I must have personal relationships. But that's not the case. That doesn't make people human. Now, depersonalization, going back to the name thing, a name is an essence of the person. The point where we have to hide that, we're depersonalized. I'm a third-generation American myself. Now, my grandfather, when he came over, his name was Samir Salim, but he changed it to Samuel Salem. Why? Why did he depersonalize? Why did he have to blend in? Because that wasn't acceptable back 50, 60, 70 years ago. He was getting all kinds of flack for having a Middle Eastern name. He depersonalized, whether it was his choice or whether someone forced him to do it like we did with slaves. We took away our names. We took away the essence of who we are, and that's exactly what the internet does. So whether the Nazis assigned you a number when you were in the camps way back in the 40s, or people decide to go anonymous, at the point where we lose this personal face-to-face interaction, at the point where we lose those things that make us human, then it doesn't matter how many Skype conversations you have, it doesn't matter how many Facebook friends you have, or people who follow you on Twitter, we have still depersonalized. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sir. The chair recognizes the member of the majority.
On a point of personal private privilege, we want to extend to the Speaker, on behalf of the Southern Political Science Association and the American Public University System, its president, President Boston, who is a Tulane graduate, and Tulane University, our thanks for the Speaker's calm, deliberate, and tolerant views today.
Hear, hear.
And to extend to the group our felicitations and hope that they will ennoble themselves with the gold medals that are over with the freshmen as well as the refreshment. And our thanks. And inquire of the Speaker if it is appropriate now to have the leaders of the parties sum up and call for a vote.
Seems very appropriate to me. Perhaps we should start off with the leader of the majority, and we'll have the minority to wrap it up. So the leader of the majority, perhaps a closing statement or two before we put the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Specifically, when making this decision here today, we have to consider, as I tell my students, with any motion, with any resolution, with any thought, we must consider the implications for what we're about to say here. Now, before us today is a motion that is a resolution of fact. This is not whether or not we think depersonalization is good or bad, or the internet is good. The motion reads that the internet will lead to increasing depersonalization of today's society. The government has gotten up here, and we have shown in a number of ways that it's increasing depersonalization. Now, is it increasing methods of personalization? Is it doing all kinds of other good things? Maybe. However, that's not the question. The question is it more personalizing than depersonalizing? The question is, will it lead to further depersonalization? Now, we show you 4chan, 7chan, 14chan, whatever number you want to put in 4chan, these anonymous groups are going. We show you World of Warcraft is growing. We show you Facebook is growing. And we show you all the good things they talk about that come along with it, but there's depersonalization that comes along with it too. So when casting your votes here today, the question you have to ask yourselves is, will the things we talked about, whether it be 4chan, whether it be Facebook, any of these things, will these lead to further depersonalization? Because they've definitely depersonalized some thus far, as the opposition has conceded. You have to say, as the internet grows, will this continue? Not do you think it's a good thing, not do you think we should take away the internet, but will the internet increase depersonalization? And if the answer is yes, then I invite you to come to our side. Thank you.
Recognizes the leader of the minority.
Mr. Speaker, we think there are several concepts that were not effectively answered by the affirmative, which ultimately is going to lead to the detriment of their case. But furthermore, we think that we've offered enough offensive analysis and explanation as to why we think that not only does depersonalization not occur, but in fact personalization increases. And this is enough to prove the case for the opposition. To the first issue, we think that they're not proving the categorical statement of the resolution itself. The only examples they give are 4chan or a million chan. It doesn't really matter what chan we're talking about. But the point is that is a very small minority of cases of the types of websites, social networks, and social mediums that exist online. To use a small minority of cases to prove a categorical statement is logically fallacious and incoherent, and we will not accept that in today's debate. But furthermore, we also don't get any sort of explanation as to why names and faces, specifically online, are key to establishing the identity of an individual. We give you plenty of other examples of how individuals not only establish other parts of their identity, but how they're able to personify that to the online community and then take that and translate it to the physical offline community. Shanna gave you plenty of examples of that, and we think those are excellent, and those should be remembered in today's debate. But finally, we think that personalization increases on the individual level and on the social level when giving people the opportunity to engage one another, to communicate one another, and to build upon that communication. That's how we establish relationships. That's the whole point of interpersonal communication, is that way we can take those relationships further, make them more personalized to ourselves, and furthermore allow for a greater social cohesion. We think the sort of solidarity that we're looking for when it comes to allowing for the personalization of society, we think the solidarity occurs only when you allow for the internet to continue doing what it's doing, to continue unifying societies, and to continue allowing people to engage one another. For all these reasons, we are proud to oppose the motion.
Okay, in a moment, the chair will put the question and verbally review what the motion is and ask for a voice vote. Before he does, though, the chair would like to recognize Dr. Paul Rich and the Policy Studies Organization, without whom this would not have occurred. The chair would also like to remind everyone that where you stand on this need not be determined by where you sit. So we will now proceed to a voice vote on the motion that the internet will lead to an increasing depersonalization of society. May I hear those who agree with that indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
And those who disagree by saying nay.
Nay.
I'm afraid in the judgment of the chair, the defections from the majority coalition have proved catastrophic, and the nays have carried the day. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again very soon.
There were a lot of gamers in this room.